Let me ask you what this, to me, it looks like a bird's fecal sac. You know that birds who nest don't want their babies to poop in the nest. So they've evolved this little sack, and the babies put the poops in the sack, and the parents carry it out and drop it, and it goes splat on a leaf. And that's pretty much what it looks like. But that is not a fecal sac. That actually is a spider, a bola spider. And at night, it looks like a real spider. It hangs from a leaf and it drops a single strand of silk with one sticky glob of glue at the end there, and it goes hunting. Now, you wouldn't think anything would fly into that single target, but they do. Moths fly in and get stuck. The spider spins them around very quickly, wraps them up in silk, and then has a nice meal. Then she cuts the body loose and goes hunting again. She'll catch another moth and have a meal, and another moth and have a meal. And when she's had enough meals, she's got the energy to create an egg mass. And what she does is this is a spun cocoon, and she puts all the eggs in the cocoon, and that is how they overwinter. And if hunting's really good, she'll make two or three egg masses and hang them all in a row. Now, the real question to me is why is a moth flying into that single target? And it turns out it is not an accident. She's releasing the sex pheromone of a particular species of moths. So all the moths that fly in are males, thinking that she's a female. She is a female, but she's the wrong species. And I wanted to know what the species of moth was that the bola spider in my yard was attracting. So I unwound the little bodies that were underneath her and found out it was the bronze cutworm. And I've got bronze cutworm adult males because I've got bronze cutworm caterpillars. And I've got bronze cutworm caterpillars because I've got goldenrod, which is one of their primary hosts. I also have dot line white moths because I've got oak trees, primarily white oaks, and because I don't rake away the leaves. There is a dot line white cocoon in this leaf litter right there. And I tell you, you would not see that when you were raking leaves. So when you rake leaves, you're actually raking away a lot of life forms. There it is right in the middle. I've got evening primrose moths because I've got evening primrose, which I planted to attract that beautiful moth. It worked. The moth came, spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. Sometimes it's crowded, but it's always very cute. I have zebra swallowtails because I planted pawpaws to attract the zebra swallowtails. That is the only host plant for that beautiful butterfly. It would take me a long time to describe all the species that now call our property home. It would not take me very long to describe what's happening on a typical residential landscape. There is no goldenrod in a typical residential landscape, which means there's no brown cutworms, which means there's no bola spiders. There are no oak trees, which means there's no dot line whites. There's no evening primrose, so there's no evening primrose moth. There's no pawpaws, so there's no zebra swallowtails. There's really very little that can live in a typical residential landscape. And we've got 135 million acres of typical residential landscapes in the US, which is 5 times larger than all of the land managed by the National Park Service. And we're not through. We're developing 800,000 new acres of natural areas every year in the US. I love the word developing as if we're improving it. It's one of the reasons we're seeing some discouraging headlines these days, like the insect apocalypse is here, talking about the global decline of insects. North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of our North American bird population already gone. 22% decline in butterflies since the year 2000, and they weren't doing that well in the year 2000. Two-thirds of Earth wildlife is already gone. 40% of Earth's plants are facing extinction. The UN is predicting we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years, and they made that prediction 3 years ago. Now, it's a prediction, hasn't happened yet, and that's the good news because we have to make sure it doesn't happen because those are the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. But if you add all that up, it allows Elizabeth Colbert to write a book about the sixth extinction on planet Earth, the one we are rapidly barreling toward, but the one we have to make sure it doesn't happen because if there is a sixth extinction, we'll be part of it. So, what's our reaction to biodiversity loss? I've actually been pleased with our reaction because I didn't think that many people cared, but they do care, and scientists are actually studying what our reaction is. Richard Hobbs is one of them. And he thinks that our reaction to biodiversity loss is very similar to our reaction to learning that we have a terminal disease. There's 5 stages. 5 stages of grief. First, there's denial. And we certainly have a lot of denial out there. We've got anger. I feel that sometimes. Bargaining, well, maybe we can do this and it's not so bad. And depression, I think we all feel that at some point. Then stage five is acceptance. And this is where we have to fight back because acceptance is the same thing as giving up. And giving up on nature is not an option because nature is not optional. We totally depend on it. So let's change the fifth stage to action. There really are things we can do to prevent that sixth extinction. Now, we do have national parks, um, and they were developed primarily because they were exquisitely beautiful places. And Teddy Roosevelt had a lot to do with that. This is what he said. He said, the establishment of the National Park Service is justified by considerations of good administration. So Teddy was patting himself on the back, which is fine. Of the value of natural beauty as a national asset, and of the effectiveness of outdoor life and recreation in the production of good citizenship. In other words, our parks were created because they were beautiful places for us to play in. They were not created with conservation in mind. And that's one of the reasons we have only 3.6% of the US in the national park system. Only 12% is federally protected. And that is well below a number of other countries that are out there, even though we were the first country to come up with a national park system. But we do have parks, we do have preserves, we've got land conservancies. Why are they not enough to sustain the biodiversity that we need? It's a good question, and there are actually several answers. But the big one, the most important one, is that they're too small. When you take a large area like this and you shrink it down to a little fragment of its former self, and that's an exaggeration, you're taking large populations and shrinking them down to small or tiny populations. And that's the problem. Small populations are highly vulnerable to local extinction. Why? Because all populations fluctuate. In good times, they go up. In bad times, they go down. This is a large population up here. Even in the down cycle with large populations, there's enough individuals that they can increase quickly when times get better. But if you're a tiny population, often in those normal fluctuations, you hit zero. You blink out of your little habitat patch, and then you're gone. And unless you recolonize that habitat patch, you are permanently gone. And recolonization is getting harder and harder these days as our parks and preserves become more and more fragmented. Picture a box turtle trying to cross Route 95. This doesn't happen. Studies all over the world are telling us the same thing, that we have not sustained enough nature on this planet to sustain ourselves in the long run. And some of these studies are long-term, more than 100 years in length. So it's pretty solid data giving us a big warning. Now, we tend to use extinction as a metric of trouble, but I don't like that because that's like going to the doctor when you're dead. It is too late. So I think a better measure would be the decline of the species, the abundant species that once ran our ecosystems. And this is a good example. This is the American chestnut. It was the dominant tree from Maine all the way down to Georgia along the Appalachian crest. And then, of course, we brought in the chestnut blight and we essentially eliminated it. Now, it's not extinct. It still comes up from root sprouts here and there, but it's functionally extinct. They're no longer common enough to perform their roles in their ecosystem. Same story with the rusty patch bumblebee. It was not long ago one of the most common bumblebees in the country. It is now so rare that if you see one, it's a big deal. I've never seen one. So they're not extinct, but they are functionally extinct, no longer performing the pollination services that they once did. You could make the same claim for American beavers. When European settlers came to this country, the hydrology of the entire country, the hydrology of entire North America, had been established by beavers and was maintained by beavers. And we essentially trapped them all out, changing that hydrology. Now, beavers aren't extinct, but every time they act like a beaver, we trap them and move them so that they don't act like a beaver, which means the hydrology is still changed. This paper just came out this year that says the birds that are actually declining are not the rare species, but the most common ones, the ones that are actually running our ecosystems. So what we're talking about is defaunation, the reduction in the abundance of the species that run ecosystems. That's the real problem. It's local, it's everywhere, and we tend not to notice. And we tend not to notice because of something called shifting baseline. We think that the way things were when we were kids is the way they've always been. That's normal to us and the way they always should be. So if you're born into a world that is defaunated, you don't notice it. That's normal. None of us miss the passenger pigeon because it was extinct before any of us were born. So defaunation and shifting baseline are the real problems. It means that we're losing the biodiversity that sustains us, and we don't even notice it. Edwin Wade Teal decades ago said we cannot make the world uninhabitable for other forms of life and have it habitable for ourselves. It's just common sense. So what shall we do? Well, there's actually some good news, and that is that the biodiversity crisis is part of the global discourse. The UN has met at least 3 times to talk about it. The latest time was last May, when every country in the world met to talk about the biodiversity crisis except the US. Well, the UN discusses the problem. This is a quote that came out of the meeting in Montreal a few years ago. Crucial negotiations to protect biodiversity are moving at a snail's pace. So what's amazing is that we're negotiating whether or not we're going to protect what keeps us alive on this planet. Well, they'll pass resolutions, we'll ignore them, but at least they're talking about it. What did E.O. Wilson say about the biodiversity crisis? Well, E.O. Wilson, of course, a great Harvard professor, the late E.O. Wilson, he died a few years ago. But one thing that was consistent throughout his very long career was his love of life on planet Earth and his efforts to save it. And in 2016, he wrote this book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. And he had one simple message. He said, if we're going to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we're going to have to save nature. We're going to have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the planet, or it will disappear everywhere. And he talked about the science. Most of the book was dedicated to the science that supports that very bold statement. And when he says life will disappear, he's talking about humans too. This is a very bold statement. Well, it's great news to conservation biologists. We'll just put half the earth aside, and all those things that are in trouble can be in that half, and we'll be in the other half, and it'll be great. Problem is, half of terrestrial Earth is already in some form of agriculture. I don't see that diminishing anytime soon. And we got 8.4 billion people in the rest of the Earth, along with all of our hardscape, our roads, our airports, our detritus. And we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we realize E.O. Wilson's dream? That's really what I want to talk about tonight, because I think we can, but we need a new approach to conservation to doing that. We have got to give up the old idea that humans and nature cannot coexist, cannot be in the same place at the same time. The message is, not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. Now, in the past, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head and practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. So we're not just going to practice conservation here, we're going to practice conservation over here. But look, there's nothing to conserve over here, so we've got to go beyond conservation and put nature back. We've got to move into restoration. And that means we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. Not hang on by a thread, not get diminished every year, but thrive. So fragmentation is often talked about as the real problem, and it certainly is a real problem. And what they're talking about is fragmenting viable habitats into tiny remnants that are too small and too isolated from each other to actually sustain the species within them. When you're a small habitat, everything in there has to interbreed. And that leads to inbreeding depression and decline in populations. So what's been suggested is creating biological corridors where plants and animals can move back and forth between real habitats. And that theoretically will reduce the problem from inbreeding depression, because now you can actually mix genes between habitats. But it doesn't change the big problem, and that is the habitats themselves are still small, which means the populations will still oscillate the way normally they would, and they'll still disappear over time. So I think we have to go beyond biological corridors and actually build viable habitat outside of viable habitat by putting the plants back. That's better. That's even better. These lighter areas could be where our major cities are and our farmlands. But what are these areas here? It's our private property. It's where we live, where we work, where we play, where we worship. We're going to put the plants back, and we're going to make them viable habitat. But to do that, we need a new attitude about property rights. We've got this idea that we have the right to own a piece of the earth. And once we own it, we can do whatever we want with it. This is our castle and we're the kings. The problem is our properties are not like Las Vegas. You know that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, what happens on our properties does not stay on our properties. That is the problem. All of our properties are part of local ecosystems. So whatever we do on them, whether it's positive or negative, is going to impact that entire ecosystem. So let's talk about what would happen when we decide we're going to have a lawn like this on our property. Well, that'll determine whether rain infiltrates when it falls or whether it leaves as stormwater runoff. You know, in the summertime, your lawn gets really baked and it's very hard for water to soak in. And when it leaves as stormwater runoff, you're determining whether it's going to carry nitrogen and phosphorus and herbicides and insecticides, all that stuff we put on our lawns, into the local watershed. So a lawn like this is determining whether you're polluting the local watershed. You're also determining how much carbon you're going to add to the atmosphere every time you mow it, which is probably once a week. You're also determining whether or not you're going to support pollinators. A lawn, if you have a lawn the way you're supposed to have a lawn, you're not going to have any pollinators. There's no flowering plants there. You've eliminated the resources that they need. You're also going to determine how much carbon you're sequestering, that you're pulling out of the atmosphere. Remember, that's what plants do. They build their tissues out of carbon, and after they do that by fixing carbon through photosynthesis, but they don't use all the carbon they fix, so they pump the extra carbon into the ground through their root systems for long-term storage, but only if you have the plants there to do that. Our plant choices, the ones we actually put on our properties, are going to determine whether we're harboring ecological tumors like Callery pear, Bradford pear, any of the invasive ornamentals we have that escape into our natural areas, push out the native plants, and I call it locally castrating those ecosystems. And then finally, our plant choices are going to determine how well we're supporting the food web. Are we choosing plants that produce the insects that feed the birds and everything else? So how we landscape, how much lawn we have, and our plant choices are really going to determine how much life our properties can sustain. And that is an awesome responsibility. And it's an awesome responsibility that most homeowners do not know they have. But it creates a grassroots solution to the biodiversity crisis. There are millions and millions and millions of us. And if all of us accepted the responsibility of conservation right where we live, whether we own the property or not, we really can turn this problem around. Where are we going to do it? We're going to do it on private property. Almost 80% of the lower 48 states is privately owned. 85.6% of the area east of the Mississippi is privately owned. And if we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail. And of course, failure is not an option. And that makes the private property owner the hope and the future of conservation. Let's return to lawn briefly, because it is the low-hanging fruit. We can address this big lawn problem very quickly. It is a big lawn problem. 44 million acres of lawn is the latest figure I've seen, which is an area bigger than all of New England combined, dedicated to an ecological deadscape. Why do we do that? Well, lawn's a status symbol. It's a very important status symbol. How we fit in with the current culture is often determined by how well we manicure our lawn. We also like neat, and it's easy to keep lawn neat. And we've got to display our Halloween decorations. But what if we reduce the area of lawn? Now, I'm not talking about getting rid of lawn. It is the perfect plant to walk on. So wherever you're going to walk in your property, that's where there should be lawn. But if you look outside, nobody's walking on their property out there. It's a barren wasteland. But let's make the math simple. Let's say there's 40 million acres of lawn out there. We're going to cut that in half, restore 20 million acres that were once lawn right at home. And that's what we're going to create Homegrown National Park out of. And it'll be a big space. It'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all this parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. It's a real thing. We're a small nonprofit, homegrownnationalpark.org. So you go to our website and you can register your property on the biodiversity map. And that simply means putting down your location and the amount of area that you're pledging to become a good steward of. Maybe you really are going to cut your lawn in half. Maybe you're going to plant an oak tree. Maybe you're going to put, excuse me, an aster in a flower pot. It doesn't matter how big or small the effort is. Just record that in the database, and your little piece of your county is going to light up with a firefly. That's our little emblem there. And of course, the goal, you get to see how many other people in your county have joined Homegrown National Park. And the goal is to get the entire country to light up with fireflies. Our mission is very simple. We want to motivate millions of people to regenerate biodiversity in the way that you regenerate biodiversity, by planting the natives that support it, by removing the non-natives that don't. And in so doing, building a culture sympathetic to the needs of conservation. Our vision is to see a world where conservation and restoration is the default. It's what everybody does, whether you're an individual or whether you're a group. It is the default around the world. It's going to be so commonplace that we don't even have to talk about it anymore. That's our vision. Now, this is where our national parks are right now. We want to turn this into that. Shouldn't be that hard. There are real ecological products associated with Homegrown National Park, and a significant increase in biodiversity is one of those products. And I'm going to give you some examples of how well this works when we give nature half a chance. A measurable reduction in invasive species. If everybody got rid of the invasive plants just on their property, we'd be 78% done countrywide, 85% done in the east. Not completely done, but it'd be a very good first step. Significant drawdown of atmospheric CO2. Lawn is the worst plant for sequestering carbon. So if you turn that lawn into just any other kind of plant, you're going to sequester a lot more carbon and help climate change. And we're also going to start to build viable habitat outside of viable habitat. Any bit of conservation you do outside of a park is going to help conservation inside of the park. Very important sociological products associated with Homegrown National Park, too. And one is national awareness, not just of what the problem is, but what the solutions are and what our roles in those solutions are. We are trying to change the culture. We want people to recognize that nature's not optional. It's not just there for our entertainment. It is essential. It is essential for everybody on the planet. So I think that means everybody on the planet has to own responsibility to sustaining it. We want to convert hope into action. Hope is good, but action's even better. And we want to merge all the existing conservation organizations like Audubon and National Wildlife Federation and wildlands and all the land conservancies, Sierra Club. We want to get the wonderful conservation that they're doing on private property, get that recorded on the biodiversity map. You know, the UN has a 30 by 30 initiative. We're going to preserve 30% of the earth by 2030, 30% of the US by 2030. It's a wonderful goal, but it's not going to happen unless we record biodiversity conservation that is happening on private property. So if we record it on our biodiversity map, we can see how we're doing. If we're going to take areas like this and turn it into that, then we've got to take that and turn it into that. Notice we didn't get rid of the house. People still live there. This actually is my mother-in-law's old house. And when they built it, it was farmland. None of these trees were here. And it didn't take that long to create viable habitat. Did I mention that Homegrown National Park is free? We don't charge because we're not trying to pull membership away from other conservation organizations. We just want to record the good conservation other groups are doing. So you can belong to Audubon at the same time you belong to Homegrown National Park, and so on. And Canada, by the way, has joined us, and maybe we can get the whole world to join us. But there is urgency in enacting the Homegrown National Park solution. Remember that 135 million acres of residential landscapes? That's a big job. So we all need to get to work, and we need to understand what it is we're supposed to do to succeed. Well, there's at least four ecological responsibilities that every single piece of property out there has. Every property needs to support a food web. If you don't have a food web, you don't have any animals in your property. And if you don't have any animals, you don't have a functioning ecosystem. Every landscape has to sequester carbon to help climate change. Every landscape has to manage the watershed in which it lies, and every landscape has to support pollinators. Lawn does none of those things, which is why I pick on it. We don't need 44 million acres of it. Plant choice. We've got to learn how important plant choice is. It really does matter. This, of course, is burning bush, a highly invasive ornamental. There are three kinds of plants out there. There are plants that contribute energy to local food webs, plants that do not contribute energy to local food webs, and plants that remove energy from local food webs. Very best contributor in 84% of the counties in which they occur is one of our oaks, genus Quercus. We've got 91 species of oaks in this country, and they are contributing more energy to local food webs than any other plant genus by far. A good example of a non-contributor would be a ginkgo, Ginkgo biloba from Asia. It's a nice ornamental tree. It's got good fall color, but nothing eats a ginkgo. So it's not adding. It's capturing energy from the sun, but it's not passing it on to anything. So it's not enhancing the local food web. And a good example of a detractor would be any of the invasive ornamentals that we brought in that, of course, don't stay where we plant them. They push out the native plants, the contributors that do add energy to local food webs, and you end up with a net loss of energy from that local food web. We also need to gain an appreciation for caterpillars. Now, if you've heard me before, you know I'm always talking about caterpillars, but there's a good reason. Caterpillars are the meat and potatoes of terrestrial food webs. That energy that we're talking about that plants gather from the sun is passed from those plants to other animals, mostly by caterpillars. They're transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. That's why Dan Jansen calls them the meat and potatoes, or the bread and butter of terrestrial food webs. And that's why keystone plants are so important, because they make the most caterpillars. Remember what a keystone is. It's a stone in the middle of the Roman arch, and if you take it out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they're the plants that are making most of the food. Just 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. So think of the keystone plants in the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that hold that house up. They're the support system. Your house isn't going to stand up on wallpaper, and that's what we've been trying to build houses out of for the last 100 years. So if you want to know what the best plants are where you live, you go to Native Plant Finder, the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code, and the ranked list of the most important woody and herbaceous plants in your county will pop up. And this is abbreviated because I ran out of room. But the old excuse of not knowing what to plant is just an excuse, because now you do know what to plant. Now, you folks live on the coast, and that gives you an extra challenge because you've got to deal with a lot of salt. So here's a list of woody and herbaceous plants that do well in salt and can be used in your everyday landscaping without worrying about losing those plants. Just look, some of them are right up there. White oak, my favorite, northern bayberry, sweet pepper bush, American holly, a lot of options. You're recording this so you can see this later on. All right, let's talk briefly, though, about why native plants, why these keystone plants are supporting the most caterpillars. Why don't the non-native plants do just as well? It's a good question. And the answer is because most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. They can only eat particular plants. They can only eat the plants to which they are adapted. Plants don't want to be eaten, so they load their tissues with nasty tasting chemicals. And the insects have to be able to get around those chemical defenses to use the energy in the plant. And 90% of the insects that are eating plants are host plant specialists. They have particular enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize their exposure to those compounds. But it does take a long period of interacting with those plant lineages for all those adaptations to fall into place. And once they do, the insect is locked into eating that particular plant. So let's use the monarch butterfly as an example, because we know a lot about the monarch. We know it is a specialist on milkweed. And we know that milkweed's a toxic plant. It is loaded with cardiac glycosides, which is why you should not be eating milkweeds. It'll stop your heart. And it also has sticky latex sap. Well, the monarchs are adapted to the cardiac glycosides. They've got the enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify it. So that's good. But what about the sticky latex sap that give milkweeds its name? If you break open a milkweed leaf or a vein, the white goo comes out. That's that latex sap. And if you get it on your finger, you usually wipe it off right away. But if you let it sit there for a minute or so, it starts to gel. It turns into a chewing gum-like substance, and that is its defensive property. It glues, if it gets on a caterpillar's mouth parts, it glues its mouth shut, and then the caterpillar starves to death. So it's a really effective defense, which raises the question, how does a monarch caterpillar eat milkweed without gluing its mouth part shut? This is something you can watch right in your yard. Plant common milkweed is a good one to watch it on. The caterpillar will walk onto the leaf, and the first thing it does is go to the end of the leaf and it starts to eat. And if any latex sap starts to come out at all, it'll stop eating immediately, turn around, go back up the leaf, and it starts to chew through the midrib. And it chews till it has completely severed the midrib, which means it has blocked the canals that shunt the latex sap from this part of the leaf to this part of the leaf. So now this part of the leaf is latex free. So the caterpillar can turn around, go back down, and it can eat the leaf without any latex sap coming out at all. It's a very simple behavioral adaptation that most other insects have not figured out how to do. But it does flag the leaves, which actually gives you a good signal for whether a milkweed patch has monarchs or not. You can actually drive down the road and look at a milkweed patch, and if there are no flag leaves, it probably doesn't have any monarchs. So those are the upsides of specialization. Excuse me. Monarchs have the adaptations necessary to get around all the defenses in their host plant, which are toxic plants to most other insects. The downside of specialization is that now that's all they can eat. By specializing on milkweeds, they did not develop the adaptations necessary to get around the defenses of any other plant genus. So out of the 2,137 native plant genera found in North America, monarchs can only eat one, Asclepias. Host plant specialization. And the important point I want to make here is that monarchs they're not special. 90% of the insects out there have adaptations just like monarchs that make them specialize on particular plant lineages, which is why when we take away the native plants and we let the non-natives take over, we lose our insects. And this is what I mean by losing them. We have measured what happens when we allow non-native plants to replace the natives that our caterpillars need. And we've done it several different ways in my lab. But this was a very simple experiment I did with an undergrad. We went into hedgerows in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Delaware that were either invaded with non-natives. So this is full of autumn olive and multiflora rose and oriental bittersweet and on and on and on. And compared the caterpillar populations in standardized way in invaded hedgerows with hedgerows that are not invaded, mostly native plants. The real challenge here was finding hedgerows that were not invaded. But we did. And it turned out that there was a 68% reduction in the number of species of caterpillars when they were invaded with non-natives, a 91% reduction in the abundance of those caterpillars, and a 96% reduction in the biomass of those caterpillars. The amount of energy actually that the caterpillars brought to those hedgerows. If you think of caterpillar biomass as bird food, you've reduced bird food by 96% when you allow an invasion to happen. Now, E.O. Wilson is gone, but what he wrote is not gone. And we need to read it and reread it again because he said so many important things. And one of the things he said way back in 1987 was insects are the little things that run the world. His central message of this paper was life as we know it depends on insects, and if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, it would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our vertebrate animals would collapse. We would lose our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And again, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. So if all that's happening, why do we have National Insect Killing Week? Now, this was 1929, before E.O. Wilson wrote that paper. but our attitude really hasn't changed. This was a campaign to boost the sale of all brands of chemicals to rid the community of insects. Notice, not to get rid of the insect pests, but all insects. All insects are bad. We got to kill them all. So we've come a little bit from that, but not that far. We still have an undeclared war on insects. Now we do have to think about pollinators, and we're doing better with pollinators. It is becoming common knowledge that we need our pollinators. But the reason we need our pollinators is a little off base. You hear all the time that we need them because they pollinate a third of our crops. It's actually about a twelfth of our crops. And I hear people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. We do need pollinators. We need them everywhere, not just in agriculture, because they're pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. A few of them are our crops, but most of them are not, and we need those plants anyway. So losing our pollinators is not an option. And we have to gain a better appreciation for the ecological value of leaves. Leaves do so many important things, yet we rake them up and bag them and burn them or throw them out as if they're garbage. They're protecting soil moisture. Leaves form a blanket on the soil and protect the moisture in that soil, which is essential to everything that lives in that soil, including the mycorrhizal fungi that are transferring nutrients from the soil to our plant roots. Leaves are protecting the soil from erosion. They're recycling nutrients. All the leaves, all the nutrients that your tree used this past year is tied up in these leaves. If you don't get that nutrients back into the soil so the tree can use them again, then you've lost them. So if you rake away your leaves, and you do it year after year, you're actually starving your tree. And of course, leaves are the homes for lots of animal species. And people worry about, of course, well, I can't have leaves because I can't get my plants through those leaves. But think about it. I mean, who was raking the leaves before we got here? And there were plants in North America. I read about it. They're very good at getting through our leaves. Here are delicate little violets at my house coming through shingle oak leaf litter that I did not rake. So here they are in the beginning. It looks like, oh, maybe they won't make it. Oh, they're doing better, better. Of course, they have no trouble getting through those leaves, never raked a single one of the leaves. And you can look at just about all the plants. Now, if you pile them up 5 feet thick, yes, our plants won't get through them. But a normal layer of leaf litter, no problem. And leaves, of course, are home for the birds that are out there. For our sparrows, sparrows are not going to our bird feeders at all. They're getting insects and seeds that are in the leaves. Juncos, same thing. Cardinals have spent a lot of time foraging in leaf litter. Flickers, you see them. Maybe they're called flickers because they're flicking the leaves all the time. I don't know. But there are also 70 species of moths that we call litter moths that live in that leaf litter all year round. And that's what their caterpillars are eating, the leaf litter. And that's one of the things those birds are looking for if you keep the leaf litter on your property. Light pollution. We have to think about light pollution as a major cause of insect decline because these are all the ways that lights are killing our nocturnal insects, particularly the moths that make the caterpillars that run our food webs. It is a really, really serious environmental issue because look at the number of lights that we have. But it has a really, really simple solution. First of all, you are allowed to turn your light out. There's no rule that says you have to have your light on. I know you're worried about security. So put a motion sensor on your security light so that it only turns on when the bad man comes. Even simpler is take the white bulb out of your light and put in a yellow bulb, an amber bulb, because nocturnal insects are not attracted to yellow or amber lights. If we were to switch out our white bulbs for amber lights overnight, we would save millions of insects. And if we used LEDs, we'd save millions of dollars as well. Mosquito fogging. I know you people don't do any mosquito fogging, but a lot of people do. It's a booming business around the country. I don't blame people if you listen to what the mosquito foggers say, because they say it is a natural organic product and it only kills mosquitoes. And if that were true, I would hire them. Excuse me, but it's not true. Natural and organic, maybe it's a pyrethroid derivative, and that's the compound in chrysanthemums. But cyanide is a natural organic product, and ricin is a natural organic product. So being natural and organic doesn't say anything about its safety. Only kills Mosquitoes, that's not even close to true. That is blatant false advertising. It kills everything that's out there, including our monarchs, including our pollinators. And I've been saying this for years, and I've heard it anecdotally. This is a friend of mine that was on Kent Island when they had a mosquito fogging event. He picked up a handful of dead monarchs, but he said there were thousands on the ground because it was during a major migration event. But it's hard to find where this has been tested systematically. So we did that this past summer. We looked at the barrier sprays that the backpack sprayer guys come and spray around your property. They boast that they can reach the top of your trees. And what they're doing is laying down this pyrethroid base on everything, on your fence posts, on your trees, your leaves. Well, we tested that, and up to 30 days after the spray was applied, it still killed everything that walked across it. And we tested 26 different species of insects and arachnids from 9 different orders. It's really deadly stuff. If you have a mosquito fogger come twice a summer, you have created a dead zone in your yard for the entire summer. There are alternatives. It's not that we want to keep our mosquitoes around, but you control them in the larval stage, not in the adult stage. And mosquito dunks is a good way to do it locally. You get a bucket, you fill it full of water, you put in a handful of straw or hay, and put it out in the sun for a couple of days, and it builds up the population of diatoms and algae. And that is what mosquito larvae eat. So the mosquitoes will lay their eggs in your bucket, the females will. Then you go to the hardware store and you buy a sheet of mosquito dunks, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. There's a natural bacterium that only kills aquatic diptera, and the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is a mosquito. So it's cheap, $12 for a season worth of control. If everybody did, it would help, but you're living on a barrier island and you're living next to salt marshes. You are living next to mosquito breeding grounds, and it's a tough problem. It's just one of those things that you just kind of have to accept because of where you live. Eliminating mosquitoes from a million acres of salt marsh is not something you should even be thinking about. Neonicotinoids. If you have a little home garden and you plant corn or soybeans or just about anything else, the seeds are usually colored. They're pink or they're purple. That is neonicotinoid seed coatings. Now, this is just one of the ways neonicotinoids are applied to plants, but seed coatings make no sense at all. And that's, first of all, they are really toxic. They're 7,000 times more toxic to insects than DDT was, and we're putting them on our seeds. And they're used preventively. So whether or not you have an insect problem, you're putting neonicotinoids into the soil. If you compare corn or soybeans that have seed coatings with neonics and don't have seed coatings with neonics, there's no increase in yield. So we're using this product for nothing. And the reason we get away with it is that it's cheap. So people say, well, why not? There are good reasons why not. Only 5% of the product is taken up by the plant that is supposed to protect. And the other 95% either washes off and gets into the watershed where it's very permanent, or it is blown away on dust where we don't have any idea what it's doing. But it's a useless material that, if you're going to buy seeds, make sure they don't have neonicotinoids on them. Okay, another thing we need to realize is that small properties can be very effective in conservation. This is Pam Carlson's yard in Chicago. It's 1/10 of an acre. She's a budding O'Hare Airport. She's not connected to any natural area at all, yet she's recorded 127 bird species that have used her property. It's 100% native, except for her little bit of lawn here. It's beautiful. It's exactly what the future of landscaping should be, even though she's in the middle of a big city. And if you have no property at all, just very little, these are all natives here. This is wood poppies and violets, very, very pretty. Or you can just use container gardening. So you might only have a front porch or just a very small property. Container gardening with native plants is becoming more and more popular, and they can be very effective for, particularly for migrating monarchs and all of those local pollinators. This is a pile of bricks, but if everybody put plants on their balconies, it would be a valuable resource for any of the local native bees. And there are actually a number of native bee species that do live in cities struggling out their existence. We can help them out with container gardening. Now, fortunately, we do have a silver bullet in our fight against both climate change and biodiversity crisis. We can address them both at the same time through conservation, and conservation works. This is the Nachusa grasslands in Illinois, 3,800 acres. More than 730 native plant species are recorded there. 180 species of birds have used this site. It used to be a cornfield. Nature really is resilient. This is Mentor Marsh in Ohio. It was the largest Phragmites stand in Ohio, 811 acres. Well, believe it or not, they got rid of the Phragmites, and now it's a thriving freshwater marsh, including both wild rice and deer-tongued Sagittaria. Both are state-listed species. So it is possible to get rid of these invasives and have thriving ecosystems once again. Glenn Schneider is a guy in California who leads a group of volunteers, small group, 5, 6 people every weekend up to Sibley Regional Park. And they get on their hands and knees. They have a little hand whacker and they have a squirt bottle of vinegar. And what they're doing is whacking out the invasive grasses that were brought in for cattle. And they spray the roots. They don't do a lot of area any one time, but look what comes back. They didn't plant this. This was all the seed bank that was just waiting for somebody to get rid of these invasive grasses. Conservation works. And this is where Cindy and I live. This is what it looked like when we moved in the year 2000. We got 10 acres of a very old farm, been farmed over 300 years, and then they gave up. They sold it off into 10-acre lots. But the last thing they did was mow it for hay. Now, when you mow for hay in southeast Pennsylvania, and we live in Oxford, Pennsylvania, what you're really mowing is the rootstocks of all the invasive plants that are there. Multiflora rose and Oriental bittersweet and autumn olive and Japanese honeysuckle and bush honeysuckle. And when you stop mowing, that's what comes back. So by the time we actually moved in, it was 10 acres of invasive plants from Asia. So we can't do any restoration there until we get rid of this stuff. And I don't want to minimize how much work it is. But it is less work when you get your spouse to do it. And when she's finished, you can put the plants back, which is what we have done. We're doing it over the years. So the question is, has life returned? And you can measure life any way you want. I'm measuring it in terms of the number of species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres and the number of species of moths, because those are the caterpillars that the birds are using to raise their young. And I'm measuring the number of moth species by taking a picture of every moth that I can find. I've been doing that for, I don't know, at least 9 years now. Still doing it because I keep getting new ones. I'm up to 1,366 species of moths that are making a living on our property because we put the plants back. And many of them are really cool creatures, like the chinkapin leaf miner, the skullcap skeletonizer, the neighbor, they've got great names, the little devil, the horrid zalie, the forgotten frigid owlet, the obtuse yellow, the explicit arches, and yes, there's an implicit arches as well, the snowy shouldered aclaris, the grateful midget, the morbid owlet, the pink shaded fern moth, the feeble grass moth, the scribbler, the lemon plagotus, the three-patched bigwing, the unsated sallow, the cynical quaker, the showy emerald, the green marvel, Harris's three-spot, the confused woodgrain, the slowpoke, the tearful underwing, the eyed pectes, the hog sphinx, the tufted bird-dropping moth. Who wouldn't want the tufted bird-dropping moth on their property? This is my favorite, the spun glass caterpillar, and hundreds of others have come to the plants on our property because that's what they need to survive. And that's one of the questions I get is, how come you have any plants on your property? Why aren't these caterpillars eating all of it? And it's a good question, except remember, these are the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes of terrestrial food web. Everybody is eating these caterpillars. Remember those birds. A breeding pair of birds will eat hundreds of caterpillars every day, and that's just one pair. I'm surprised I can find any caterpillars at all. And I've got 62 species of birds that have bred on our property, feeding their young caterpillars all the time. We also have lots of other creatures that are eating insects themselves, like ambush bugs and assassin bugs. This is the predatory stink bug that is eating. These are the milkweed tussock moth. Sat next to this aggregation and he ate one a day. maybe ate more than one a day, but it got much smaller over time. Got a lot of hymenoptera and parasitoids that are laying their eggs in caterpillars. Most of them do attack Lepidoptera. We have other wasps that will sting the caterpillars, paralyze them, then carry them back to their nest, and then they lay an egg on the paralyzed caterpillar. This is nature's form of refrigeration. If they killed the caterpillar, it would rot before the egg even hatched. But this way, it's nice and fresh, so when the egg hatches, their larva has something to eat. Then we've got vertebrates that are controlling our insects. We've got a few skunks. We've got possums. We've got raccoons. We've got foxes. 25% of a red fox's diet is insects. And of course, we've got amphibians. We've got spring peepers. We've got green frogs. We've got toads. We've got wood frogs. We've got salamanders. We've got ringneck snakes. They're all insect eaters. And we've got the cutest little gray tree frogs that are actually green when they're little. Again, helping to keep the trophic levels in our yard in balance. Now, there's something that's common to all of these conservation approaches, and that is whether or not they succeed is going to depend on the decisions that you and I make. This was part of an answer that Amanda Crandall, one of my students, student in my class a few years ago, wrote on a final exam. She said, while conservationists claim to be managing species and habitats, what we're actually managing is people. That is so true. This is a sociological problem. We need to change our adversarial relationship with nature to a collaborative one. It's the only way forward. So the real question is, can we do that? I think the answer is, of course we can do that. You don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. A lot of people are concerned about the state of the planet these days, but they all figure, what can one person do? And I can understand that, but one person can do a lot. One person can shrink their lawn. One person can modify their lights. One person can add a pollinator garden. We didn't even talk about that. One person can remove the invasive plants on their property, use keystone plants, fire mosquito Joe. There's a whole bunch of things one person can do to revitalize the little piece of their local ecosystem on their property. And if they do, it'll enhance that ecosystem. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You get depressed. Just worry about the piece of the earth that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious that's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park or preserve. They're all underfunded. They're all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. Robert Swan recently said the greatest threat to our planet is believing that someone else will save it. It's not going to be someone else, folks. It's going to be you, folks. So I hope that Homegrown National Park can provide the motivation for you to do that, the guidance, a lot of information on our website, and a community. We want to build a community of conservationists to tackle these essential conservation challenges, because whether or not we do so today is going to determine nature's fate and then ultimately our own. So thank you very much. There are some of the websites that I mentioned, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Doug, thank you so much. I have some questions here. Let's see. Where are we? So the first question is, my name is Jim Kelly. I'm running for city council, and I hear a lot of people expressing financial concerns due to the changing economic landscape. Are there simple ways that using native plants can save money?
Well, yeah. If you have a lawn service, get rid of them. You don't have to pay to do this. Again, Cindy and I have 10 acres. And in the last 25 years of restoring this 10 acres, we probably spent about $100. And we did it all in one day when we went to a nursery that was going out of business. We didn't need to buy those plants. The native plants were coming in on their own. You can do something, we call it addition by subtraction. You don't actually plant any plants, you just remove the ones you don't want, and the natives will come in. Now, if you have a really tiny property and you don't want to wait very long, you can buy these plants, but you can save a lot of money by buying them small. When I say plant an oak tree, I'm talking about a 2-inch oak tree that just germinated from an acorn that you could have collected for free, not a 15-foot oak tree that will cost you $1,000. When you buy a big tree, they've got to prune the root mass before they plant it. or they grow it in a pot where it's going to have a very small root mass. And then it sits there for 10 years trying to build up that root mass. If you plant a small tree, yes, you've got to protect it from the deer for a while, but it will grow farther, faster and be a much healthier tree than if you buy a big one. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. So, of course, doing things yourself saves a lot of money, but I don't know. That should get them started anyway.
Great, thank you. Okay. Someone had asked, when you were talking about leaves, not raking them and everything, they said, should the leaves not be mulched either?
Yes. Yeah, remember that dot line white cocoon or the Luna moth cocoon I didn't show you or the polyphemus cocoon? There are really important insects that are in those leaves. Those 70 species of litter moths, all the predators, the fireflies that as larvae are predators in leaf litter. If you grind it up with your mower, you've killed all of that. So maybe it makes the leaves a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, but it shortens their lifespan because they'll break down much faster. And it's you're taking away a lot of the value of those leaves by grinding up the things that live in them. So I would say try your best not to mulch your leaves.
Great, thank you. Let's see. We had a lot of comments, just people sharing resources, which is very helpful. Um, Someone had asked about if there are any flowering plants in New Jersey that the deer won't eat, and we had a few people put some suggestions. But I don't know if you want to add to that. Someone put a link to jerseyyards.org about flowering plants that deer don't eat. Um,
Wingstem is, I hope that's on the list. It's a tall plant, should be in the back, but it flowers at the end of the summer, end of August and early September. Very good for fall pollinators. Has rough leaves. The deer don't touch it. But I wouldn't. I mean, and we have deer wingstem. I'm happy because we got a ton of deer. But you don't want to build a totally deer resistant landscape because if it's deer resistant, typically it's insect resistant too, or at least caterpillar resistant. And then you've got a landscape that's not producing the caterpillars necessary for that food web. The real solution to deer is to control the deer population, to not oppose deer culling, or we can bring the predators back. I don't care how we do it, but we have about 10 times more deer than the this area can sustain, which is why we have Lyme disease, which is why we don't have replacement in our forest. Lots of serious problem with deer overabundance.
Great, thank you. Let's see. You might have addressed this enough already, but the question is, I've heard of neonicotinoids. How do I ensure that the plants I'm buying weren't grown with fertilizers or pesticides that are dangerous to wildlife? And I think you addressed this a little bit. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah, it's hard. And if you go to a nursery and you buy a plug or a plant, you don't know that he hasn't put neonics in there that can last a long time. So you can ask him, do you use neonicotinoids? And the nurserymen are getting sensitive to that. So he either lies to you outright or tells you the truth because there are more and more nurseries that are trying to not use them, using other methods of pest control. I do have sympathy for the nurseryman who's growing plants under glass in the wintertime because it is very hard to do that without getting spider mites and thrips and white flies. And if that happens, you've got to use some kind of insecticide. So they're up against a rock and a hard place, but neonics last. They're systemic insecticides, meaning the plant takes them up, and you can't wash them off, and you have to wait for them to live out their lifetime in a plant. And if it's a woody plant, that can be 3 or 4 years before they're gone.
Thank you. Let's see. Lots of great resources in the chat. Thank you, everybody. Someone said, can you comment about the use of hybrids versus native plants that have been bred over time from various nurseries?
Well, I think you're talking about cultivars. A hybrid is actually a cross between two species. If you take a native and you cross it with a non-native, it's not going to support the insects as well as the straight species. But you're probably talking about cultivars, which are genetic variants of straight species. And if it's a genetic variant of a native species, it's still a native species. The question is it a genetic variant that is not as productive as the straight species? We did a study looking at 6 traits for woody plants. So if you take a tall plant and make it short, or if you take green leaves and make them red or purple, increase berry size, introduce disease-resistant traits like that. We did a 3-year common garden experiment, and the only trait that consistently reduced insect use was taking a green leaf and making it red or purple. So I can say avoid red leaf cultivars. Most of the cultivars are focused on flowers, though. And sometimes it doesn't seem to matter, but other times it matters a lot. If you make a double flower, what you're doing is taking the reproductive parts of the flower and turning them into petals. They're beautiful, like all of our hydrangeas are double flowers, but they're not producing any nectar or pollen, so they're not helping the pollinators at all. Um, what else do I want to say? Oh, go to the Mount Cuba website, Mount Cuba Center website. That's in Hockessin, Delaware. And they have been doing uh, trial gardens with straight species and cultivars of lots of different flowering plants over the years. And it's all up on their website. It's a DuPont estate. You should, in Hockessin, Delaware, if you have a chance to visit it, it'll show you how well you can use native plants. But a lot of information on that website, and you can compare your favorite cultivar and see how it does with the straight species.
Great, thank you. Let's see. There was a question. It says, I am a councilman in Ocean City. What can the city do to encourage residents to use more native plants in their landscaping?
Well, stop finding them if they do. I could see a chat right down there now. I use goldenrod and aster in my front yard, and then I get fined for doing that. Um, there are a lot of ordinances on the books about how tall the grass can be. If it's more than 2 inches, you get fined, and we have to relax some of those standards. But at the same time, I do want to encourage people to use natives respectfully of the current culture. This is where lawn is a very useful tool. So use lawn as a cue for care. The lawn you keep is going to be mowed, it's going to be manicured, it's never going to be where all the biodiversity is. So it should line your driveway and line your sidewalk and the new beds that you put in. Then you can put anything in those beds, and most people don't mind at all because the lawn is being kept. It shows your landscape um, is intentional. But if you're a councilman, you want to encourage the use of natives. Talk to your nurserymen. The demand for native plants now exceeds the supply, so that's a business opportunity. If we just convince the nurserymen that they're actually going to make money and sell these things if they start supplying them, you should be able to increase the native composition of your city.
Thank you. Let's see. The next question is, what else can I do if I get rid of my grass without being overwhelmed with large trees like oaks?
Well, I will point out that some small oaks, the dwarf chinkapin oak, will make acorns. I got a picture of one with acorns on it when it's knee high. Usually they wait till they're 5 feet tall, but all oaks aren't gigantic. So that's just one thing. Um, so what important plants can you have that are not big is the question, I think. Native viburnums, Viburnum dentatum's very high on the list. But this is where you've got to be sensitive right there on the coast about salt sensitivity. So look at that list that I had out there. Black cherry is a very important plant. Native willows are very important plants. Some people think they're weedy, but they're very high at supporting biodiversity. Or you could just say, all right, I'm not going to do trees. I'm going to focus on pollinator gardens. The very best pollinator garden is going to have something in bloom from April all the way through October that satisfies the sequence of bees that are going to be coming along. That's difficult to do, but that's where you can put your energy. How can I get the native plants that are my specialist pollinators need? 30% of our 4,000 species of native bees require particular plants, just like the caterpillars do. They can only breed in the pollen of particular plants. So have a sequence of those specialist plants, and you can satisfy the needs of your specialist pollinators and the generalist pollinators because they can use those plants as well. And I can tell you that native asters, native perennial sunflowers, and goldenrod, they're the three top plants in terms of supporting specialist pollinators. If you have those three genera in your yard, you can have up to 40 species of specialist pollinators that won't be there if you don't have those plants. So yeah, put your energy into herbaceous plants instead of the trees.
Thank you. Hmm, Let's see. Someone asked, why do growers create cultivars? Would they sell straight natives if there was a market for it?
Yes, they would if there was a market for it. Sometimes there's good reasons. So, for example, if a particular native has a disease problem, let's say with powdery mildew in the fall, they created cultivars that actually fight the powdery mildew. That makes sense. Taking a tall plant and making it short can make sense for a small property. You don't want a tall plant flopping over. But most of the cultivars have centered on changing flower shape and design just because we have thought plants are just decorations. And it's just like the hemlines, they go up or they go down. Every year we got to have a new cultivar so that people will buy it again. If we're trying to landscape for ecological value, we know the native works. So focusing on the straight species is probably going to be something that happens more and more in the future if the public demands it. Nobody wants to carry inventory that people aren't going to buy. So support your local nurseryman if he has straight species natives by buying them.
Okay, let's see. Sorry, just going through the questions. Okay. Um, what should you do if you live in an agricultural area where large quantities of Roundup are used adjacent to your property?
Um, well, you can make very sure that it's not on your property. One of the biggest problems we have with the loss of the monarch in our agricultural areas, and it started in the Midwest, but it spread all the way to the East Coast, is that the edge of the field used to be native plants. They called them weeds, but that's where the milkweed was and the asters and the goldenrod. And then when we invented Roundup Ready corn and soybeans, they sprayed the Roundup right up to the road and killed everything and then replanted it with grass that has to be mowed. So that removed thousands of miles of resource for monarchs, and that's what caused the crash of the monarch population. So make sure he's not spraying anything that you own. But boy, I don't know. He's a farmer, and the law is on his side. He has the right to farm, and that's a tool that everybody uses. I don't think you have any legal way to prevent him from doing that. Um, Tough one. I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's all you really can do. Um, someone just asked, when replacing cool season grass lawns, is it more beneficial to plant annual wildflowers from seed, perennials, or a mix?
I would say that depends on the size of the area that you want to plant. Um, Starting from seed is definitely more difficult because you want to start with a bare slate. So if there's any grass left in your lawn, it's going to outcompete the seed very easily. So you have to kill all the grass one way or another before you start from seed. If you start from plugs, it is definitely more expensive, but every one of those plants is going to live. Many of the seeds that you buy and put down are not viable, or they're not going to germinate, or something happens to them. So if you have a smaller area and you want quicker results, I would start with plugs because then you actually get results very quickly. If you do start with seeds, and it's done properly, you're going to have a beautiful planting in 3 years. The first year, the seeds are going to come up. They're tiny little green things. It's hard to recognize that they're even there. A lot of people get discouraged because it looks like nothing happened. The second year, you can tell you got good plants there, but they don't really come into their own until the third year. And at that point, it's just gorgeous. So be a little patient when you're going to do that. There's some good books about how to make a meadow, and I might recommend buying some of those books, particularly one by Larry Weiner, or go to one of his webinars about how to make a meadow because he's been doing it successfully for 30 years.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to point out, if everyone just sees in the chat box, that a PDF of additional resources was shared by Lily. So if you just want to take a minute to download that so that you have it after the Zoom is finished, a lot of great important resources on there. Also, just want to point out, I put the link for the virtual book discussion that we will be having. I'll put that one more time, just don't want those to get lost. And we have a few more questions here. Someone said, do the deer repellents at garden stores affect the insects?
Yeah, good question. It has never been seriously tested, but my prediction is yes, because insects find their host plant through smell. Each plant puts up a perfume, and that's how they locate their host plant. And then they taste it and say, well, this is what I should be eating. Deer repellents change the smell of the plant and they change the taste. Makes it like rotten eggs or wolf urine or some other nasty thing. So if that didn't discourage insect use, I'd be really surprised. I mean, you can test it. Get one of your milkweed plants and spray it with a deer repellent and see whether any monarchs use it. My prediction is they won't, but it has not been adequately tested, so who knows?
Thank you. We had two similar kind of questions. They wanted to know, how can we work with our city councils, so our local governments here at the beach, to work with native plants for new construction landscaping?
Well, we can pass ordinances about that too, and more cities are actually doing that. Where a high percentage of the plants that developers have to use are going to be native. It's the only thing that makes sense. Right now, we create landscapes where the buyer has to rip it all out and do it the correct way. It ought to be the opposite, where we landscape them correctly, and then if the buyer wants to change it, that's on them. But if most people aren't gardeners, they just want to accept what's there. So using a preponderance of native plants, less lawn, a better planted landscape should be default. How do we get them to do that? Top-down regulation would get them to do that, but it's really going to be the market that demands it. If we stop buying properties that aren't landscaped properly, they'll stop making them. It's going to cost a little bit more money in the beginning because grass seed is cheap, but they'll get the message that people are looking for greener landscapes. And we are moving in that direction. There's a big developer in Florida, and I mean big, called Sunbridge. Thousands of homes, but they're working with us, Homegrown National Park, and I think it's 75 to 80% of the landscape is going to be native as they're putting them in to begin with. So that's a huge step forward.
Thank you. Let's see. Do we have any? Oh, someone asked, do you know of any municipalities or larger that have any legislation restricting pesticides or fertilizers?
Uh, Toronto has a total pesticide ban. That's not in the US, but they've done it. Do I know of any US ones? I'm sure they're out there. I probably have even heard about them, but every day that I get older, I remember less. So I can't cite anything for you. But this is one place AI is really good. Ask that question to AI and it'll search the literature and come up with an answer in a few seconds.
Thank you. And there's a lot of great resources people are sharing, but somebody mentioned that New Jersey passed the New Jersey Invasive Species Management Act S1029 in January of this year. So
And
that's
and what does
something.
that act do?
That is a good question. Let's see, Patricia, I don't know if you want to expand on that while you're doing that. Let me see if I have. Oh, someone said, Doug, is the rate of gardens popping up on HNP increasing?
Yes, yes,
It's
very
very,
positive. Last I saw, we had 48,000 members and 170,000 acres promised or registered on the map. So
wow.
700 organizations have registered on the map. So,
Oh my gosh.
I
Okay.
mean, we want millions, but it's headed in the right direction. So,
That's amazing. That's incredible. Okay, we'll just take a few more questions. Let's see. Um, Also, Doug, just want to say a lot of people are saying thank you and just singing your praises in the chat box. So I'll save it so I can send it
yeah,
to
okay, you
Lily.
say well that. Thank you.
Yeah, save it. I'll save it. Let's see. Any more questions? I have one more here. Someone wants to know what gives you hope.
what gives me hope is the speed with which all these changes are happening. When I read Bringing Nature Home, I didn't think anybody'd read it. Um, well, it turns out that the timing was right just by coincidence, but people love the feeling of being empowered, that they actually can be part of the solution. They can see the differences when they do this. It's a feel good movement that really does make a difference. So that's positive, and I think that's what's spreading the word as much as possible. You get to a threshold where people tell people, and it really is spreading throughout the country very quickly. So much faster than I thought it would, and I'll thank all you people for that.